In my last video, I said that if there was one thing to know about me, it's that I love James Bond. Well, that's true, but if there were two things to know about me, it would be that I love James Bond and that I love The Simpsons. If you've ever even taken a half-second glance at this wall of crap behind me, you would notice several Simpsons-related items, including this Bart drawing up here, and this Deep Space Homer action figure. And if you actually zoomed out even farther on this wall, you would see several Simpsons items. The Simpsons have been a staple of my media consumption ever since I was a kid, and I've always wanted to talk about the show on this channel. What better time to talk about The Simpsons than right now, during the spookiest season of them all, Halloween season. If you've never heard of Treehouse of Horror, what hole have you been living in? It's a series of anthology specials released every Halloween by The Simpsons, starting with season 2 all the way back in 1990. Usually I only talk about movies on this channel, but since many of the segments on Treehouse of Horror are movie parodies, I think I can get away with it. Today I'll be taking a look at and ranking every single segment from the first 10 years of Treehouse of Horror specials. With 3 segments per Treehouse of Horror episode, that's 30 segments we're going to be ranking. How will I be ranking them, you say? Solely off personal enjoyment, nothing else. And if you disagree with my list, feel free to leave your own list down below in the comments section. I mainly judge a Treehouse of Horror segment on 3 things: the comedy, the creativeness, and if it's a parody, parodic effectiveness. Now, I don't think parodic is even a word, but I like the term parodic effectiveness as a way of looking at the effectiveness of a parody. Before we get into this list, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what your favorite Treehouse of Horror segment is down below, and we'll see later if it matches with mine. I'm starting this list off with something that might be considered a hot take to some, but actually my 30th favorite, or least favorite, if you will, of these 30 Treehouse of Horror segments is actually Bad Dream House, which was the original segment in Treehouse of Horror. In this story, the Simpsons move into a haunted house. Now, this segment isn't bad or anything, it just really isn't that exciting, and compared to what would follow it, it really just doesn't have that many memorable moments. That being said, there are a couple of really funny jokes in this. There's a scene where the family is all going to kill each other with knives, and you think Marge is in on it, but she was actually just preparing dinner. That was a, decently funny joke, and then the house actually commits as opposed to living with the Simpsons inside of it. Now that was pretty funny, but other than that, this segment really doesn't do it for me. It's okay. Everything that came after it is much superior in my opinion. Not to mention that some of the concepts used in this very segment would later be used again in one of my favorite segments, and therefore, there's not a whole lot of a point to revisiting this one. This might be another hot take, but at the second to last spot on the list, we have If Only I Had a Brain from the second Treehouse of Horror. In this story, Mr. Burns and Smithers alike tried to create the perfect employee by putting a human brain into a robot. However, they end up through a comical series of events, ending up with Homer's brain in that robot, so obviously their plan backfired. Honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of Mr. Burns-centric episodes in general. I like him more as a side character, so this segment doesn't really do it for me. Just isn't super original or that memorable to me, so that's why it's this far down on the list. Continuing the trend of hot takes, at 28, I have King Homer, which again might be sacrilege to some of you, but this one just isn't all that funny to me. Again, it focuses a lot on Mr. Burns, who I'm not a huge fan of in central roles. This one's a pretty obvious parody of King Kong, with the apish Homer playing the apish ape of King Kong, so it didn't take a whole lot of effort to come up with, but it still works. I like the aesthetics of this one. The black and white's really nice, and there are a few really solid gags, like Homer falling off the building from only a few stories up. Overall, it's just not really one of my favorites. However, I do plan on buying the new King Homer plush from Jakks Pacific, which I think will fit in really nicely with the rest of my Simpsons action figure collection, so there's at least that. All the way down here at 27 is Easy Bake Coven. Not one of my favorite segments, but it does still have its moments, like these first few on the list do. It basically follows the Salem witch trials, but with the characters from Springfield. Fun fact, the women believed to be witches in Salem were not actually burnt at the stake, but instead hanged. Not really a fun fact, but a common misconception. I've always loved the dark comedy surrealism of the Mike Scully era of The Simpsons, and this one definitely has some of that, but it's not dialed up to the extreme that I like to see it at. So this one generally ends up being a skip for me most years, and I don't love the reveal with Marge being the witch. I don't think it's as funny as a similar reveal in a segment that we're going to talk about later on this list. So that was Easy Bake Coven. Coming in at number 26 is Citizen King. Citizen Kang. This segment follows aliens Kang and Kodos as they take over the bodies of presidential candidates Bill Clinton and Bob Dole. This one's funny to me because I do really enjoy American history, but it is dated and the political references do kind of go over my head, and I would assume go over a lot of viewers' heads today. This one might have been more popular nearly 30 years ago, but for me it's just not one of the best. It does have some pretty funny moments. I do like seeing the two presidents hanging out completely naked. I think that's pretty funny, but the social commentary, I guess, just isn't that strong, so it's not one of my favorites, but it does still have enough laughs to where it's not at the very bottom of the list. Next on the list is a similarly dated segment to the last, that is Life's a Glitch and Then You Die, which I believe is a reference to the Nas song from 1994. Life's a bitch and then you die. Illmatic, best rap album of all time. This one's pretty solid, but it again just doesn't hit like it probably did back in Y2K, which is what this segment's all about. The standout moment in this episode is where Lisa is invited to enter the spaceship that is successfully escaping Earth.
Love you lots.
Goodbye, Lisa. Remember me as I am, filled with murderous rage.
The lampooning of the bad celebrities at the end of the segment is also pretty funny and is perfect in the Scully era of The Simpsons. It's nothing special, but it comes after two of my favorite segments, so I usually keep this episode on every year and finish it off with this segment. The next entry on the list pains me to put it so low, but it is none other than the first special segment, The Raven. I can understand why so many people would put this at the top of their list with the excellent narration of Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven, by the late, great James Earl Jones, and just the somewhat creepy visuals and even a few pretty funny gags throughout. A lot of the enjoyment of a Treehouse of Horror segment goes to the watchability factor or the rewatchability factor, which The Raven's not super rewatchable for me. I watch it maybe once a year, but probably once every 2 or 3 years. Objectively, this is a fantastic short, and if it were an objective list, this one would be definitely top 10, but since it's my list, I'm going to put it where I think it belongs, which is in this spot. At number 23, we have The Bart Zone, which is kind of a parody of a general Twilight Zone episode. I can't think of which episode it's directly parodying, if one at all, but it does have the vibe of a Twilight Zone episode. It merges the Simpsons with the Twilight Zone pretty perfectly, with Bart having supernatural mind control powers. They're sort of vague, and we don't really know where they came from, but in this universe, this alternate timeline of The Simpsons, Bart is feared by the entire town of Springfield. It's pretty funny at first with the town fearing Bart and kind of making everything go Bart's way, but eventually it turns into a father-son bonding episode, something maybe you'd see in a regular Simpsons episode, and that's just a really funny twist on the setup. This one definitely subverts expectations of where you think it's gonna go, and I think it is pretty successful in doing so. However, I think that later on, The Simpsons did get a little bit better with parodying the Twilight Zone, and we'll get to that one soon enough. Dial Z for Zombies is next on the list, and it's not really one of my favorites. It is pretty funny though. I like the way they're able to kind of turn many of the classic Springfield residents into zombies and have that change their personalities. This just isn't really one of my favorites. It is pretty funny, and it has a few funny moments. I especially love Homer shooting Flanders.
Mind if I chew your ear? Dad, you killed the zombie Flanders.
He was a zombie?
This one's also particularly gruesome, which I like when the Treehouse of Horror segments do get a little more violent, but that doesn't do enough for me, who typically prefers comedy aspects over the violence. And this one is funny, but it's not the funniest, so that's why it's this low on the list. Another potentially controversial take, that being Bart Simpson's Dracula, here at the 21st spot. Now, this one is good. It's not great. It is a parody of Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992, although it's a loose parody, so the parodic effectiveness is not as high as it is with some of these other ones, especially since Bram Stoker's Dracula is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. The looseness of this parody, I think, diminishes its effect on me. The highlight of this one for me is the Bart and Lisa team up, which I love a good Bart and Lisa team up. Usually they're kind of at odds with each other, but in this one and a few others that we're going to talk about later in the list, they team up, and their comedic chemistry together as equals is a delight to see.
Lisa, Burns isn't a vampire, and even if he was, we're not gonna stumble on his secret hiding place.
You're probably right.
I also love the design for Vampire Burns, which of course was inspired by Gary Oldman's design as Dracula in Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I love the twist at the end of Marge being the head vampire, which I alluded to earlier. It's just kind of a funny image more than anything else, but it is a good ending to the segment. Like I said, I think all 30 of these segments are at the very least entertaining. This one just doesn't really reach some of the heights as later ones, like I've said with all the others so far. Coming in at number 20 is Terror at 5.5 Feet. This segment perfectly parodies a Twilight Zone episode which starred William Shatner, as he believed there to be some kind of ghoul on the side of an airplane, and everybody believing that he was crazy. Now, in this Simpsons rendition, it is Bart who believes there is a ghoul or a goblin of some kind on the side of the school bus, and the students and faculty of Springfield Elementary believe he's full of it. It's a pretty simple parody, but its parodic effectiveness, a term I coined earlier in this video, is pretty perfect, and it's also just really funny. This one has quite a few laughs for me. The incompetence of the Springfield Elementary staff is on full display here, and that's always just a joy to watch. It's funny, simple, and a well-executed parody, so it's a pretty good one. I think that there are 19 more that are superior. A Nightmare on Elm Street is another one of my favorite horror movies of all time, so it's no surprise that I'm a pretty big fan of Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace. That being said, it's not one of my favorites. Also, it's pretty good though. It's definitely funny. It has a lot of cool visual gags, I think. I do like Groundskeeper Willie as the surrogate Freddy Krueger character. The visuals in the dream sequences in this segment are great, and this one does include another Bart and Lisa team up, so that definitely gives it a few points. Even though I love the original movie and I do really like this segment, ranking these Treehouse of Horror segments is a lot like ranking your children. It's hard to do, but it is possible, and everyone has done it. Time and Punishment from the 5th special is a pretty inventive, creative segment. Homer basically has a toaster that allows him to travel back and forth in time on accident, and each time he goes back in time, he messes up the future in a worse and worse way. It's just pretty creative, it's simple yet effective, and has some pretty funny jokes, and it even has a great bit where Groundskeeper Willie tries to save the day and ends up getting stabbed in the back with an axe, which is a reference to the first segment of this episode, but we'll talk about that one later. For now, Time and Punishment is just pretty funny, and it has a few solid gags. It's not one of my favorites, but it's definitely one worth revisiting, and it actually has grown on me over time. Up next is Attack of the 50-Foot Eyesores from the 6th special. I've always had a hard time saying the word sixth. I learned that recently at work. 6th. In this segment, giant mascots of restaurants and of other businesses come to life and wreak havoc on the citizens of Springfield. This one is pretty funny, it's visually interesting, and it's a little violent, which does tick the boxes for what makes a good Treehouse of Horror segment for me. It's just not one of the best. I find myself having less to say about these ones in the middle because they're all good. They tick a lot of the boxes, but they just aren't as good as some of the later ones. So yeah, I'd still recommend watching this one. It's still a good time. Up next is the 9th special segment, Starship Poopers, which is not really a parody of the film Starship Troopers, though I will say that is a pretty cool movie. I like Starship Troopers quite a bit. This segment reveals that the true father of Maggie Simpson is not Homer Simpson, but in fact the alien Kang, who, got it on with Marge. The look of alien Maggie is an iconic one, and this isn't my favorite segment by any means, but it is pretty funny.
Homer, do something! The ceiling's not a safe place for a young baby!
And includes a great Jerry Springer appearance, and I always like to see Jerry Springer parodies or appearances in shows or movies, though this one is not nearly as good as his appearance in Austin Powers.
We have a surprise for you, Scott. Okay, let's bring out Scott's father, Dr. Evil.
Still, it's a funny segment, and sometimes that's all you really need with the cartoon is just sit back and laugh and forget about your horrible, depressing life. Coming in right at the middle of the list is the Homega Man from the 8th special. In this one, Homer survives a nuclear blast that was delivered to Springfield by the French after Mayor Quimby used a slur against them. Honestly, the opening of this segment is so funny to me that it made it this high on the list, because anything after the bomb drop I don't think is as strong as the opening, which I think could nearly be the setup for a regular Simpsons episode up until, the bomb hits and everybody dies. The rest of the segment after the bomb drop it's just okay. It's pretty good. It's fairly standard. The mutant direction they go in, I'm not super keen on, but it has its moments. And the final reveal that the Simpson family is still alive due to the lead paint in the house is funny enough to save it for me, so that's why it ends up here right smack dab in the middle. Fly vs. Fly from the 8th special is not a parody of Spy vs. Spy, but the title card obviously is. It's more of a parody of The Fly, in which Bart Simpson purposefully turns himself into a fly so that he can become Flyboy. This one's just funny. There's a few good gags with this teleporter that the Simpsons get from Professor Frink, and I do really get a kick out of seeing the tiny fly body with Bart's head on it. And honestly, the fly head on Bart's body is a little bit creepy at times. This is a funny segment, but it's not one of my favorites. I do really like the art design in it more than anything else, but it's still worth a watch, and I do usually revisit it every year. Hell to Pay, kind of a good pun there, is another segment from the 9th special. This one follows the ghost of Snake, who is seeking revenge on all of the people who put him in the electric chair, and he died in the electric chair. They killed him. So he's out for revenge against Apu and Moe and Bart Simpson as well. The twist here is that the ghost of Snake is actually living and acting through his hair, which Homer now has as a toupee. So that's where the title Hell to Pay comes from. This one is pretty gruesome, honestly. This one has some of the darker kills in all of the Treehouse of Horror, and it also has one of my favorite endings to any of these segments. It gets me every single time.
Freeze, hairball!
And also the look of Homer with this toupee is just kind of iconic. It's pretty cool. I Know What You Diddly Italy Did is a parody of the movie Scream and features Marge Simpson running over Ned Flanders, killing him. The Simpsons then tried to hide this murder. Somebody, we don't know who at the time, knows their secret. However, not all is as it seems when, spoiler alert, Ned Flanders is revealed to be alive and well. having transformed into a werewolf. This segment has a couple of really great jokes. It also has some pretty cool atmosphere that's actually a little bit scary, at least. The ending also has a pretty good twist, which I honestly forget about almost every time I rewatch this segment, so it's pretty effective in being scary, and it deserves this slot pretty high up on the list. Just before the top 10, we have a segment which I personally believe is what really started the Treehouse of Horror as being a tradition, that of course being Hungry Are the Damned. This segment follows the potentially nefarious, often very silly, comedic duo of aliens Kang and Kodos as they abduct the Simpsons family and potentially try to eat them. This one is just really funny even by later Simpsons standards. So the fact that I think Hungry Are the Damned is as funny as it is really says that it's pretty peak Treehouse of Horror. The how to cook for 40 humans whole scene is just hilarious, and I'll play a snippet of it here.
Wait a minute.
Wait, there's still more space dust on here.
This segment isn't my favorite by any means, but it's definitely up there and is a classic nonetheless. Starting us off in the top 10 is Nightmare Cafeteria. This is a great segment. The Springfield Elementary staff basically become cannibals and eat the children of Springfield Elementary. Now, it sounds pretty dark, and it is, but it's also very darkly comedic, and I've always really enjoyed this one, especially when they eat Ooter.
No, that's your third helping, young man. It's making you fat and soft and tender.
Basically, the reason that the teachers start eating the kids is because they have too many kids in detention and not enough money to provide lunch to the students, so they find a commonality between those two issues and start turning the students in detention into lunch, which, like I said, is pretty dark. It's pretty funny, and it definitely belongs in the top 10.
After all, isn't there a little Ooter in all of us?
Coming in at number 9 is the segment The Monkey's Paw from the second Treehouse of Horror. In this segment, the Simpsons family has a magical monkey's paw that they can make 4 wishes off, and each of those wishes backfires in some way. This even happens when somebody like Lisa tries to make a positive wish for humanity. It still somehow backfires. Even Homer's turkey sandwich has dry turkey.
Turkey's a little dry.
The turkey's a little dry. Oh, the cursed thing!
Man, they just can't catch a break in this one. Somehow, when Homer gives the monkey's paw eventually to Ned Flanders, the wishes don't backfire, showing that the Simpsons' selfishness is going to always kind of get in their way. This one just has a fun, classic premise, and it's executed perfectly, not to mention that it's pretty funny throughout. This comes in right at the beginning of the golden era of The Simpsons, and I understand why people would definitely put this one at the very top of the list, although for me it still sits in the top 10, but not at the very top. The Terror of Tiny Toon is the first and only Itchy and Scratchy based segment of Treehouse of Horror we're going to be talking about today. And I think it's a pretty great one. The key word here is fun. It is gruesome, it is violent, as most Itchy and Scratchy cartoons are, but it actually features Bart and Lisa entering the cartoon world of Itchy and Scratchy and using cartoon logic to escape death. It's just very creative and funny, and again features a great Bart and Lisa team-up dynamic. Of course, I'm a huge fan of, and that puts The Terror of Tiny Toon at my number 8 spot. The Thing and I is another iconic Treehouse of Horror segment, this one coming from the 7th special. This one follows Bart and Lisa as they try to discover what's hiding in the attic, and it's revealed that Bart actually has a conjoined twin that he was separated from at birth, who Dr. Hibbert informed the family was the evil twin. This one has a few solid twists and turns, and it's very funny. This is one particularly famous moment from it.
Hey, why, you've probably never even seen your own face in the mirror, have you? Here.
Just a solid segment, and I rewatch it every year. Clown Without Pity is one of the most iconic Treehouse of Horror segments of all time, and there's no real question as to why. I wouldn't even be surprised if people said that this one deserves to be higher on the list than number 6, and honestly, I don't even disagree with you. This is kind of just how I felt while making the list. I think it belongs at number 6. I love this segment, and it features at least 2 of my favorite jokes from the entire show.
Take this object, but beware, it carries a terrible curse.
Ooh, that's bad.
But it comes with a free Frogut.
That's good.
The Frogut is also cursed.
That's bad.
But you get your choice of topping.
That's good.
The toppings contain potassium benzoate. That's bad.
Can I go now?
The obvious parody of Chucky, that is the evil Krusty doll, is just hilarious and timeless and is one of the most remembered things, I think, from this entire show. This one's just a perfect mix of horror atmosphere and really good comedy, and I wouldn't be surprised if this topped a lot of people's lists. I definitely revisit this one every year. Coming in at number 5 is the Genesis tub from the 7th special. This one I really like because it focuses on Lisa, who is, I think, the most underrated Simpsons character, or at least Simpsons family member. She accidentally creates a tiny civilization which evolves at a much faster rate than our own. It's such a great premise that I think it could have made for its own episode, and Rick and Morty actually turned this segment into 2 episodes, so that says a lot about the significance of this segment. I just love the creativity of this segment, and mixed with my love of the Lisa character, I think this just makes for one of the all-time best, and I don't think that's necessarily a super common opinion to have, but it's my opinion nonetheless. Coming in at number 4 is The Shinning from the 5th special, and this is one of my favorite segments based on one of my all-time favorite movies, not just horror movies, but The Shining, which I have brought up before in the past, starring the great Jack Nicholson, who is my favorite actor, and any Shining parody is going to be enjoyed by me, but this one I think is a really effective one. Homer's notably short descent into madness is a little bit jarring, but it's so funny that it doesn't bother me too much, especially with this little bit right here, which has me laughing every single time.
No TV and no beer make Homer something something.
Go crazy?
Don't mind if I do!
It also has the first appearance of the running gag with groundskeeper Willie getting stabbed in the back by an axe, which I mentioned earlier, and in this instance it was actually a reference to The Shining, where Scatman Crothers' character gets axed by Jack. This one's just pretty perfect. I wish it was a whole episode, honestly. Like, I wish this one had that full 22 minutes or whatever to tell the story, but the 7 or so minutes we get of it is perfect, and it's definitely one of my favorites. Ironically, coming in at number 3 is Homer 3, otherwise known as Homer Cubed. This one is funny. This one is purely funny. I don't think it's very scary at all, unless you consider some of these mid-90s computer animated images to be frightening, which I understand that if that was how you felt. This one is iconic, and I actually think that the animation holds up pretty well for what it is, and it has just some funny little gags.
I can't get any closer. You'll have to jump.
Piece of cake, son.
That make me watch it more than once a year, probably. This is one that I definitely often come back to, not just during Halloween, but at any point in the year, because it's just funny. I especially love the ending of the segment and also the end of the episode where the 3D Homer ends up in our 3D world. It's just funny. In the runner-up spot is the fan favorite segment, probably what most of you expected to be in the number 1. It is the Devil and Homer Simpson. In this segment, Homer eats a forbidden donut that gives the devil the ownership of his soul. Then, to determine the legitimacy of the devil's claim to Homer Simpson's soul, a trial proceeds in which Lionel Hutz, famously played by Phil Hartman, and the Devil, played by Ned Flanders of all people, settle this debate. What to be said about this segment that hasn't been said 1,000 times? It's hilarious. This is one of the funniest Simpsons segments of all time. This is funnier than most episodes of the show. Ned Flanders as the Devil is so unexpected, but also perfect at the same time. Like I said, I bet a lot of you expected this to be the #1 spot, but there is just one segment that I think is better. In my #1 spot, I think I have a pretty controversial opinion here. It is the 10th Special's second segment, Desperately Zeking Xena. I know this might not be everybody's favorite, but it sure as hell is mine. In this segment, Bart and Lisa both get superpowers and team up as Stretch Dude and Clobber Girl and go up against comic book guy's alter ego, the Collector. This one's my favorite for many reasons. Firstly, I love anytime that cartoon characters get superpowers. I think I've been this way ever since the SpongeBob episode where they all receive superpowers. As I've said, I love a good Bart and Lisa team up, and in my opinion, this is the best one in the entire show. I love comic book guy as this creepy incel villain, the Collector, who collects living humans from his favorite TV shows. And I also love all the nerdy references throughout. I love the animation, I love the comedy, I just love it all. I even bought a playset depicting this segment, and it sits atop my Simpsons shelf. I could go on and on about this segment, but if you've seen it, you know how good it is. And if you haven't, well, turn this video off right now, go over to Disney Plus, and check out the 11th season episode, Treehouse of Horror 10, and check out the second segment in that episode, Desperately Zeking Xena. So there are my rankings for the first 30 segments in the first 10 Treehouse of Horror specials from The Simpsons. Did I get it right? Do you have a list of your own? Let me know some of your favorite segments in the comments down below. I will respond to all of them. If you want to see another video, you can look right over here, or also right over here. And in the middle is going to be my face, which you can click on and then subscribe. As always, this has been Jack Roney, the movie guy, signing off.